Welcome to Joy and Gratitude, your favorite podcast about finding your way to untangle yourself into your real self. And I am Queiro, and I am with my amazing co-host, Miss Beth Mercurio. Beth, what are we doing
Well,
today?
yes, exactly. Welcome. Hello, everyone. I am Beth Mercurio and excited to be here today. And today we are going to talk about this incredible skill. And I call it a skill because it's important. I think it's something we can learn. And Neo and I constantly talk about the fact that we're lifelong learners. So this is one that I will very openly and candidly share. I still really struggle with every single day. And that is listening. And we're going to talk today about mindful listening. And I mentioned it, and we talked about it briefly, Neo, you may remember in one of a prior episode. And I just think that you and I shared together that it merits its own, its own full episode. Why is listening so hard? How do we listen with intentionality? How do we understand the impact of not listening to people and pretending to listen when we're not listening? There's so much juiciness to this topic. So I hope you guys will hang on as we start to talk about mindful listening. So, Neo, which one of those very few things that I mentioned sort of hits you the most? When I say listening, what comes to mind for you?
It actually goes back to when we're kids. So it's really interesting that neuroplasticity happens between the age of 0 and 3. 80% of your right brain is developed during that time. And the main thing that's being developed is listening, cueing skills. And that's why it's so important for parents to be so engaged with children within those years so that they can listen to their voice and they can understand reaction to situations. So the problem is we have no clue about how to listen. And it's I always call it the double dutch. When we were kids, all we cared about was, when do I get the time for me to speak? When is
Hmm.
it my turn? So, you're there, you're just waiting for that person to stop speaking. You only heard 2 words of the full sentence just so you can have rebuttal. Um,
Yes.
and it's so exhausting, but it's the way that we have been, um, basically, nurtured to react in life. Life is reactionary. And to mindfully listen, we have to stop the reaction and actually engage in the situation. What do you think?
I yeah, I think it's very true, and I think I love it bringing it all the way back to childhood because I personally was thinking about how I'm still struggling as a 53-year-old adult with listening, and that so much ego gets involved. So imagine it's almost as if, as you said that, I thought, so listening is a skill that's developed when you're that young. And then obviously we evolve and learn and grow. But it is still one that I'm sure we would all say either we have an issue with or people that we love dearly have an issue with. I mean, how many times do you hear people say, I didn't feel heard? It's like when someone says that, it means that people aren't listening to them.
That's right.
And I think that the piece of that that really hits for me is that ego gets in the way. So when you talk about people listening to respond, that's your double dutch. Like, what
Mhm.
did you say now? How do I get in? When's my
Yeah.
turn? That is all ego driven. That's you wanting to be showing that you're as smart, have as good information, are able to participate in the same way. Like a lot of that I believe is ego driven. And this idea of mindful listening, and I want to source it. Actually, I wrote it down because I think it's important. I mentioned this the last time that there's a consolidation of articles called Mindful Listening
Mhm.
through Harvard Business Review. A bunch of different articles. Yeah, see, you're nodding your head. They're
Yeah.
really all pretty incredible. But the one that I sort of really took me and confronted me on listening and how different mindful listening is than active listening is by Jack Zenger. I'm just looking over at my notes here, and Joseph Folkman.
Yeah,
Jack
I
Zenger
know what
and
you
Joseph Folkman. And they are the ones that talked about how when people used to talk about listening, it was being a sponge. That's what you wanted to do. Like I would just look at you and I would be like absorbing everything you were saying. So definitely active listening, way better than double dutching, right? Way better than letting your ego want to interject and interrupt and take over the conversation because you're a sponge and you're listening and you're absorbing. And that feels a lot closer to real, true listening. It shows presence, it
mhm,
shows a different level of engagement. There's eye contact and head nodding, and all of that is way better than not listening. But I will argue and agree with, I should say, not even argue, just wholeheartedly agree that this next step of amplification is really where we want to get to, where you're able to intentionally listen with a high enough level of engagement and curiosity and interest that you can take what that person is sharing and amplify it like a trampoline. So instead of being a sponge, which is beautiful active listening, you want to be a trampoline, which is actually amplification and mindful listening. So it takes the person's thoughts to the next level, which allows your conversation. Imagine if our conversations, where they could go to, if we were able to be so highly tuned in to the people that we're with, that we bring our creative souls and minds and hearts to their conversation. And then the conversation gets that much deeper and that much elevated. I would love for all of us to live in a world where we're mindfully listening because I think what the outcome of that, the impact of that is much more creativity, incredible imagination, possibility, and thought because we're bringing more minds together. We're doubling down on the ideas. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and maybe I want to hear what you think about that. And then I also want to talk about why that's so hard. We're talking about it like it's easy, like flip the switch and just start mindfully listening. But lots of stuff gets in the way of doing that. So that's where
yeah.
I'd love us to go. But tell me what you think when we talk about the specificity of amplifying.
I think that deep down inside, all of us wanna be really good listeners. We
Mm,
really deep down want to engage and understand, because imagine if we were, how much time would be saved. It would be amazing. But there, as you were talking, what came to mind was culture
hmm,
and how mindful listening can often be interrupted due to culture norms.
same word.
Um, so I work with diverse teams from all over the world. And what I've learned is to communicate with each one, I actually do treat them as a different persona. I make sure that as I'm communicating, I'm asking questions, I'm bringing them out. Um, and then with another team, I go into storytelling. With another team, I actually have them tell me the story and I am the reactor so
Mm,
that they can be participating in the thought. And the reason for it is going back to that child. When we were that child, we were taught how to react to conversation and information. Whether it was children do not speak, they're not to be heard. Whether it was whatever we say, that's all there is, your thoughts don't matter. You do not need to be heard. Or I cannot let you have an ounce of frustration. I have to make sure that if you have any form of frustration or intensity, I got to make everything good for you. So the way you listen is I'm first, you are my facilitator for my happiness, and it's your job to facilitate it. So every single way that we react and that we engage with each other impacts our listening. It impacts it because the expectations change in the conversation based on the reaction of the other person and based on the norms that you were fed to be your beliefs on how you should handle information. So, what does that mean? It means for mindful listening, it means that you have to enter into the space of the situation and listen at your core. Not just listen to the words, but actually listen with all your senses: the sense of smell, the sense of, the room. Is it cold? The eye contact of the other person, the tone of the voice of the other person, the body language of the other person, and your body language. So think of all your senses and the senses surrounding you. Then you can enter into mindful listening. Because what are you? 100% present. And that's what it
I
takes.
I just had another incredible aha moment. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the actual all of the senses, right? Eye contact feels very um, typical. We know that one, right? But
Yeah.
when you talked about the temperature of the room and the audience and understanding who exactly you're speaking with and knowing a little bit about where they're coming from and their mindset and their perspective, which we always talk about is so important as being a critical piece of your listening. I think about there was a time where I got a lot of feedback because you just did this. For those of you that are listening and not watching, when Neo said body language, she crossed her arms in front of her chest, right? Sort of to be uh, the what you receive on the other end of that, and it was very abrupt because she wasn't sitting that way. She was sitting very open, and then she closed off, right? So that is a very closed off stance in body language. We all know that. And yet I was freezing all the time in all of my corporate buildings. It was like I was cold all the time. And so I was constantly closed, not because I didn't want to listen or I didn't care, but I was literally like uncomfortably cold. And that was a way I was trying to warm my core. So I bring that up as a funny example where I remember people being like, I don't know, you look like, you already disagree. I was like, what are they talking about? I don't disagree.
Hmm.
But it was like I was conveying that I was closed to their idea because I had my arms across my chest and I was like holding myself on guard, which was not the case. So then I started to have to bring, I remember like I always had sweaters. I became like the layer person because I realized that I was misrepresenting myself, right? That I was coming across that I had an opinion that I did not have. So you're right. We read all of those things. And one other piece that I found really incredible about what you said, and it goes back to, for me, it goes back to ego. So you mentioned in maybe an example of a child, or it doesn't have to be a child. It could be anybody, any personal person in your sphere that has an emotional reaction that you want to quiet down, right? Like
Hmm.
because you're like, oh, it upsets you. So I agree. At a very young age, depending on how you were brought up, and I would hypothesize that many of us were brought up, certainly in our generation. Children were to be seen, not heard, right? For sure. So
Hmm.
it was like, oh, I don't want to hear that, or that's too loud, or whatever the comment was that got you to sort of say, mm-mm, you're not going to have that reaction. I certainly had that. And so then it became a thing where when my child was having an emotional reaction, which at the age of 0 to 3 is completely expected and normal, and we should all be learning our emotions at that age. How do I feel? What do I do when I'm happy? What do I do when I'm sad? What do I do when I'm angry? What do I do when I'm hurt? And I would literally shut that down, partly because of my ego, because I thought that if my child was throwing a massive tantrum in the middle of a store, that reflected poorly on me, that I wasn't raising my child correctly, that I didn't have control, whatever the word, whatever controlling your children
Hmm.
means, but I didn't have control of my child. And so I would squash that. And now we all know the research is coming out in droves that is such a disservice to our children. We should all be applauding the parents that let their child have the full thrown 2-minute tantrum out
Mhm.
in the middle of the aisle of a store because they're allowing their child to let the emotions flow through. And I will say it again because I know I've said it before. It is an amazing fact to me that if you allow an emotion to flow through your body and you do not interrupt it, it takes 90 seconds. Now, I'm also a parent that knows that 90 seconds of a tantrum feels like an hour and a half. I'm not trying to say, I mean, 5 seconds of a tantrum feels like an hour, right? So I understand that it's hard, but think about that. In 90 seconds, that emotion will flow through you and you won't hold it. You won't put it into your tissues, the things that we talk about. So for me, I just want to kind of repeat the things that were amazing is to think about the physical manifestation of what you project. Amazing to remind ourselves, like when listening to somebody, think about how you're sitting. If you're cold, go get a sweater. I kid you not. Even when I'm thinking about having a
Mhm.
really intense conversation with anybody in your family, your partner, your children, like be in the right space rather, if you can, or if it's something that's impacting you so that you're uncomfortable and distracted because you're cold. Because I guess actually, as I say this now, really what that is distracting. If your
Mhm.
temperature, body temperature, if something's going on for you in any of your five senses that's not working, then you cannot be present. So fix those things. I love that, Neo. I'm literally thinking how powerful it would be to be like, I am fully here. I am comfortable. I am all yours. Because the ability to do that can absolutely change how that conversation goes. And then to notice our ego. That's the second
Mhm.
piece of what I was saying is so impactful. If you're struggling with somebody or listening to them or understanding them or you're uncomfortable in their reactivity, so I mean listening to a tantrum is hard to do, but get underneath it, allow them to be angry, validate what they're saying, make them feel heard. I know it's so frustrating that you can't get that joy. I know what it feels like when you want something that you can't have, right? Validation, acknowledgement will really allow them to feel that emotion instead of what we typically do, which is we take our ego, it gets in the way, we shut them down, and we
Mhm.
haven't really heard them. We've just really done quite the opposite.
Right. And when we do it, we have just taught them how to react.
Exactly.
We've taught them how not to be able to experience the full emotion. We've also taught them that they don't have a right to feel that emotion. And in a world that communication has become the number one area of stress, we have to really go back to the basics, and go back to the basics with our children, go back to the basics with ourselves.
Mm.
And the reason I say that is, um, I do a lot of speaking, I go to a lot of conferences. And I was just at a conference last week and we were talking about AI, and everybody was talking about engaging with AI, whether it was an AI agent or an AI software. And I sat there and I was like, how interesting, we are basically modifying our thought pattern to engage with this computer, but we have yet to fix our own ability to engage and collaborate together. And
Wow.
yeah, it's mind blowing
Yeah, it is.
because you're saying to yourself, engage with the computer, but we're not engaging, we're not communicating well together. Yet we expect that to be the forefront. And as we are raising our children and we're giving this 1-year old a iPad and we're giving them a phone to play with while they are in their car seat, what we're forgetting is the children that actually read the books have the imagination to turn the box into a choo-choo train, to use their imagination, create. Those are the children and those are the people that are going to advance. The ones that are given the iPad, the phone, are the ones that are going to be dependent on a secondary source to guide them.
And
And
use their own
that
imagination and creativity. Is
exactly,
that yeah, I
exactly,
hear
to
you.
guide
Yeah.
them to use the imagination and creativity because they will be relegated to the ability of that software. It's always, well, how do I play the game? Oh, I do this. Oh, I learned to get to the next level. But you see, they're only in the box of that level.
Mm.
Where if I have a child that is drawing, painting, planting, creating, the possibilities are endless. And why am I going all over the place to this? Because it goes back to listening,
It does. It does.
right? Because if you only listen in a box with limitations, then you can't create. You can't think. You can't digest. You can't make the decisions happen because you're limiting your scope. And that's why mindful listening is so important because it gives you the ability to process the information beyond your comfort zone.
I I think I'm still thinking about well, 2 things. One thing, I have this fun example where, this past weekend, my daughter and her boyfriend are here visiting on their spring break from college, and we were all sitting outside. We're lucky enough to be in warm weather with my husband and some friends, and we were all I didn't know this, but we were all lined up, and we were all reading books, and somebody stopped us because they were actual books. Nobody had an electronic device. And we had all been intentional about it, but not with each other. Like we didn't say, let's go have a break. We just all grabbed our books. But I think and I say this only because I am hopeful that we all knew that we needed a break. We were tired of phones and scrolling and screen time. And we had all said, I'm just going to read an old school book. So there's a little bit of my heart that says, okay, so that's a 20 year olds and then our generation saying, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm tired. My eyes are tired from the light. There's so many things happening to us. Tech neck, right?
Mhm,
Like just all these things are happening because of this box of technology that there is so much beauty to. So we know that there's so much incredible, there are so many gifts we get from it, but we really do need to figure out what they are and then only use it for those things. So reading a book, and it was funny, I was reading Let Them by Mel Robbins, which doubles down on a lot of the conversations that we're talking about. She gives a great example similar to what we just talked about with the screaming child and how we're closing our children off. I know we've all had many parents certainly have had that personal experience. So it is on us at whatever age, right? You're never too old and it's never too late to change how we engage with each other and with ourselves. And I have been with clients lately this and it's probably already out there, but sometimes this happens where for me it seems new for me, but it's probably already out there. It's kind of a
it's
take
okay.
on my Pima children, but there I keep calling it the big 3. And for me, the big 3 are first you need to understand. And seeking understanding is all about what you just talked about, Neo. Who is your audience? Like, where are you? What's going on? Like, understanding context is a huge part of understanding. And then understanding somebody's mindset, framework, perspective a little bit more than just the outer context of our world. And once you get real understanding, which happens, mind you, through mindful listening, that you can truly understand. The next layer, number 2, is awareness. And the awareness is a self awareness about what piece of this we own. Where is our ego getting in the way? If I'm having a conversation with someone, I'm trying really hard to understand them and I'm just not understanding, or I want to like, for me, I get triggered, I get up and I want to leave the room. That's when I know I'm having a real problem understanding. Well, then I have to think, what part of that is mine? The awareness piece is around what part of this do I own, right? And once I have a really thorough understanding and I'm highly tuned in to what piece of this is around my ego, my issue, my problem, and how do I blend those things, let those things merge together and blend, and then from there, be choiceful and be able to create more choices, possibilities, opportunities, etc. So those are what I'm now feeling like keeps coming around to being the big three. Understanding, awareness, and choice and action is sort of what I feel like our lives are constantly thrown into this spin of understanding, awareness, and choice and action. And I think mindful listening, as I really think about it, crosses all of it. It's the first of understanding. And then truthfully, we have to mindfully listen to ourselves. We always come back to self to really understand how we are interacting with this conversation, communication, discussion. We all play a role in how that goes and making sure we feel really proud of how we are showing up. And if not, that we own it and we just say, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I'm struggling with this conversation. I know that uh, I've got some stuff in this space, or I know I'm still working on this. I get really upset easily when it's around worthiness or value or whatever that is, to own it. To then, what will that do? Amplify the conversation because I've now brought
Sure.
something that's real for me into the conversation. And then we're able to then have a larger, deeper, more possible, like, uh, um, uncover all the additional possibilities that are out there for us.
I'm really excited about the fact that we've taken the time and given ourselves the grace to actually dig into mindful listening and take the accountability and responsibility in the act. And you did a beautiful job with the big three summarizing what it takes from the understanding to the intentionality to the action. And to that, let's go into what the joy playlist for this session is. And I'm going to go with my love, Bon Jovi. It's my life. Just keeping it simple. It's my life, and
Mhm.
I am worthy to take the time to engage in it, to make it fulfilled, listen, and amplify every aspect of it. Let's see what the Gratitude Rocks have to say.
Yes. All right. Here we go. For those of you listening, you can hear it. This
Ooh,
today's
pretty.
word is laugh. Oh, Mio
That's
just laughed on cue. I love it.
that's so
You know,
precious.
it's precious. It's precious partly because I feel like I'm sure people felt it, heard it. This was an intense one. This was an intense conversation because I think all of us own. So there's nobody that's listening or watching that doesn't own a piece of what we just talked about around listening and can improve in that space. And so as much as it felt like there were a lot of examples and it felt like work today a little bit, probably as a listener, like, whoo, I've got to work on that. I just love that we're then going to be like, and we're going to laugh about when we don't do it well and when we mess up, and we're messy and that's okay. So let's laugh about how of the times we didn't listen and just make a choice to do it better the next time. Let's just do it
Absolutely.
better the next time.
So let's laugh. Let's enjoy ourselves as we untangle our listening capabilities with so much
Yes.
joy and gratitude. Thank you for your time. We'll see you soon.